In the vast Wyoming Territory of 1859, a Lakota hunter following elk tracks discovers something that will change two lives forever. A dying child, abandoned in a burlap sack, left to perish on the breathing plains where the earth itself seems to whisper ancient secrets. As Wichasha Waste lifts the mixed heritage girl from her makeshift tomb, he unknowingly begins a journey that will test whether love can truly bridge the divide between two worlds at war. Can a child thrown away like refuse become the bridge between peoples? Or will the very differences that mark her as special ultimately tear apart the family brave enough to claim her? Thunder rolled across the Wyoming plains like angry drums, shaking the ground beneath the old trading post that sat empty and forgotten. Inside a dirty burlap sack near the wooden steps, something small moved weakly against the rough cloth. The year was 1859, and winter was coming fast to the territory where white settlers and native tribes fought over land that seemed to stretch forever. 4-year-old Mercy Thornton pressed her tiny fists against her burning eyes. The sack smelled like old grain and something sour that made her stomach twist. Through the loose weave of the cloth, she could see tiny pieces of gray sky that looked as cold as her mother's last words. "Be good, little bird," her mama had whispered before the fever took her. "Someone will find you." But 3 days had passed since the wagon train left her behind. 3 days of crying until her throat felt raw as sandpaper. 3 days of waiting for footsteps that never came. The trading post owner, Mr. Jenkins, had packed his wagon and rolled away before sunrise, muttering about debts and half-breed children who brought nothing but trouble. Mercy's dress, once blue as summer sky, was now torn and dirty. Her mama had sewn it with careful stitches, humming Irish songs while she worked. The quilt wrapped around her shoulders still held the faint smell of her mother's lavender soap, but even that comfort was fading like everything else she'd ever known. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, long and lonesome. Mercy shivered and pulled the quilt tighter. She'd heard the grown-ups talking before Mama died. Mixed blood, they'd whispered. Irish mother, Cherokee father, doesn't belong nowhere. The words had stung like bee stings, even though she didn't understand all of them. The wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the old building. It carried the smell of sage and something else, something wild and free that made her think of the stories her papa used to tell before the sickness took him too. Stories about people who lived with the buffalo and spoke to the spirits in the wind. Her papa had dark skin and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He taught her words in his language, Cherokee words that sounded like music. Elise, he'd called her grandmother. Adsilla, he'd named the flowers they picked together. But the fever had stolen his voice before he could teach her more. Now she was alone with only the empty prairie and her fears for company. The sack felt like a prison, but she was too weak to fight her way out. Her small hands had tried to untie the rope at the opening, but her fingers shook too much to work the knots. Something rustled in the grass nearby. Mercy held her breath, hoping it might be a person come to help. But it was probably just another prairie dog, or maybe a rabbit looking for food. Animals weren't afraid of her the way people seemed to be. Her strange eyes, green like her mother's, but with flecks of brown like her father's, made some folks step back when they looked at her. The sun was getting lower, painting the sky orange and purple. Soon it would be dark again, and the night brought sounds that made her heart race. Wolves howling, owls calling. And sometimes, if she listened real hard, she could hear drums beating far away like a giant's heartbeat. Her stomach cramped with hunger. The last of the hardtack biscuits Mr. Jenkins had left was gone. She'd tried to make it last, breaking off tiny pieces and letting them soften in her mouth. But a little girl needed more than crumbs to survive on the harsh frontier. A tear slipped down her dirty cheek. She was tired of being brave, tired of waiting, tired of hoping someone would want a little girl who looked different and had nowhere to go. Maybe it would be easier to just close her eyes and drift away like her mama and papa had done. But then she remembered her papa's last words. whispered through cracked lips, "You got strong medicine in you, little one. Cherokee spirit and Irish fire. Don't you forget that." The memory gave her enough strength to keep breathing, to keep hoping, to keep listening for footsteps that might finally come. As darkness crept across the plains, something moved in the tall grass beyond the trading post. Something careful and quiet, following tracks that told a story only certain eyes could read. 20 paces from the old trading post, a man knelt in the buffalo grass like a statue carved from bronze and patience. Wichasha Waste had been tracking elk since before dawn, reading their story in bent grass and pressed earth. At 28 winters old, he moved through his world with the smooth grace of water flowing over stones. His dark hair hung in 2 braids, decorated with small eagle feathers that caught the dying light. Buckskin clothes, soft as butter and tough as iron, showed the careful work of his sister's hands. Around his neck hung a medicine bag his grandmother had made, filled with sacred items that connected him to the spirit world. But something was wrong. The elk tracks he'd been following for 3 miles suddenly scattered like leaves in a strong wind. The animals had smelled something that made them run not from a predator, but from something that didn't belong in their world. His fingers touched the ground where the elk had wheeled and bolted. The earth felt different here, tainted with fear and sadness that made his stomach tight. His people believed the land itself could feel pain, and this place was hurting. A sound drifted on the wind so soft, he almost missed it. Not the call of any animal he knew, not the creak of wood or whistle of wind through the old building's broken shutters. This sound came from something alive, but fading fast. Wichasha Waste rose slowly, every sense alert. His grandfather had taught him to trust the messages the world sent. "The earth speaks to those who know how to listen," the old man had said. "And sometimes it asks us to help." He moved toward the trading post like morning mist, making no sound on the dry grass. The building squatted against the prairie like a wooden toad, its paint peeling and windows dark as dead eyes. But something near the front steps caught his attention, a lump that didn't match the straight lines and hard angles of white man's construction. The burlap sack moved slightly, and Wichasha Waste's heart jumped like a startled deer. Inside that rough cloth, something small was fighting to stay alive. He'd seen trappers use such sacks to carry grain or salt, but this one held something far more precious. His hands worked the knots with gentle care, the same way he'd untangle fishing line or free a bird from a snare. The rope fell away, and he folded back the cloth like opening a mysterious gift. What he found inside made him catch his breath. A little girl stared up at him, with eyes the color of winter ice touched by sunlight. Her skin was pale, but bore the fine bones of his own people. Her hair, matted with dirt and tears, showed both gold and copper in its tangled length. This child carried the blood of 2 worlds in her small body. "Takoza," he whispered, the Lakota word for granddaughter. Though not of blood, something in those strange, beautiful eyes reminded him of his grandmother's stories about spirit children who came to earth when they were needed most. The little girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her throat was raw from crying, and her body shook with cold and fear. But when he spoke again, this time in the English he'd learned from traders, her eyes widened with hope. "Little sister," he said softly, "who left you here to die?" She tried to answer, but only a whisper came out. "Mama's gone. Papa's gone. Nobody wants me." The words hit Wichasha Waste like arrows to his chest. This child had been thrown away like something broken and useless, left to starve or freeze or be eaten by coyotes. The cruelty of it made anger burn hot in his belly. But anger wouldn't help her now. He lifted her from the sack as carefully as he'd handle a wounded bird, feeling how light she was, how her small body had already begun to give up its fight. The quilt around her shoulders was well made, but dirty. Someone had once cared enough to wrap her warmly. "My name is Wichasha Waste," he told her, settling her against his chest, where she could hear his strong heartbeat. "It means good man. What do they call you, little one?" Mercy, she breathed against his buckskin shirt. The name suited her. This child, who had been shown no mercy, but somehow still lived. As he carried her away from the place of abandonment, Wichasha Waste felt the earth itself seem to exhale, as if it had been holding its breath until help arrived. The elk would return to graze here again. The grass would grow green where tears had watered it. But first, he had to get this spirit child home to his people. Behind them, the empty trading post watched their departure with blank windows. Tomorrow, other travelers might stop here, but they would find only dust and echoes. The real treasure had already been claimed by someone who understood that every life had value, no matter what blood ran in its veins. The drums stopped beating just as Mercy opened her eyes. 3 weeks had passed since Wichasha Waste carried her into the Oglala village, and she still woke, expecting to find herself back in that scratchy sack. Instead, soft buffalo hide surrounded her like a warm hug, and the smell of cooking meat made her stomach growl louder than a hungry bear. Outside the lodge, children's laughter mixed with the sound of horses neighing, and women calling to each other in that musical language she was slowly learning to understand. Mercy sat up, her small fingers tracing the painted designs on the lodge walls. Red circles that looked like suns, blue lines that curved like rivers, and yellow shapes that reminded her of the flowers her real mother used to pick back when mothers existed in her world. "Hiyupo, little one," came a gentle voice from behind her. Beautiful woman knelt beside the fire pit, stirring something that smelled better than anything Mercy had ever dreamed of eating. The woman's face was kind, but Mercy could see questions hiding behind her dark eyes. Questions about where Mercy belonged and whether a white child could truly become Oglala. Mercy tried to say good morning in Lakota, but the words came out wrong, making her sound like a baby bird, learning to chirp. Beautiful woman smiled anyway, the same way people smile at puppies who try to walk on their back legs. It was sweet, but it also reminded Mercy that she was different from everyone else in ways that mattered. "Today you meet the other children properly," beautiful woman said in English, then repeated it in Lakota, so Mercy could start matching the sounds with meanings. "They have been curious about you, like prairie dogs peeking from their holes." The comparison made Mercy giggle, which surprised her. She hadn't giggled since before the sack, before the trading post, before the world decided she wasn't worth keeping. The sound felt rusty in her throat, like a door that hadn't been opened in too long. After breakfast, beautiful woman braided Mercy's hair with strips of soft leather that had tiny beads sewn into them. Each bead caught the morning light streaming through the lodge entrance, making Mercy feel fancy in a way she never had before. Her old dress had been replaced with a doveskin outfit that was softer than anything she'd ever worn, and moccasins that made her feet feel like they were walking on clouds. "Remember," beautiful woman said as they stepped outside, "children everywhere test newcomers. It is their way of learning who belongs and who does not. But belonging is not about looking the same. It is about acting with respect and kindness." The village spread out before them like a painting come to life. Smoke rose from fire pits where women cooked and worked on crafts. Men sat in circles, some fixing weapons, others making tools, all talking in voices too low for Mercy to hear. But it was the children who made her heart beat faster. About 15 boys and girls of different ages played near the creek that ran through the center of the village. Some threw sticks for dogs to chase, others waded in the shallow water, splashing and laughing. A few sat weaving grass into small baskets, their fingers moving so fast that Mercy wondered if they had magic powers. When the children saw her coming, the playing stopped. Conversations died like campfires doused with water. Every eye turned toward her, studying her face, her clothes, her hair that was lighter than theirs. Mercy felt her stomach twist into knots, tighter than the rope that had once bound her prison sack. A girl about Mercy's age stepped forward. This was Wichasha Waste, beautiful woman's daughter, which made her Mercy's cousin now. She had the same kind eyes as her mother, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had never been abandoned. "This is my cousin, Tahunke Waste," announced to the group, speaking in both languages so everyone understood. "She lives in our lodge now. She is learning our ways." A boy with arms stronger than his 6 winters should allow crossed his arms over his chest. "She doesn't look like us," he said, his words sharp enough to cut. "Her eyes are the wrong color. Her skin is too light. Why should we play with someone who belongs with the white traders?" The comment hit Mercy like a slap. She wanted to run back to the lodge, to hide under those warm buffalo robes and pretend the outside world didn't exist. But Tahunke Waste stepped closer to her side, and somehow that gave Mercy courage she didn't know she had. "My eyes see the same sky you do," Mercy said quietly, mixing English and Lakota words together because she didn't know enough of either language to say everything she felt. "My heart beats the same as yours, and I don't belong with traders because they threw me away like old bones." The honesty in her voice seemed to surprise the children. They looked at each other, then back at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The boy who had challenged her uncrossed his arms, his expression shifting from anger to curiosity. "Threw you away?" asked the girl with braids so long they touched the ground. Why would anyone throw away a child? Mercy felt tears trying to escape from her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying hadn't helped her in the sack, and it wouldn't help her now. "Because I don't fit anywhere," she said. "Too Indian for the white people, too white for the Indians. Nobody wanted a girl who was mixed up like soup with too many things in it." Tahunke Waste reached out and took Mercy's hand. "You fit here," she said firmly. "My father found you because the spirits wanted you to be Oglala. The spirits don't make mistakes." The children stared at both girls for a long moment. Then the boy who had challenged Mercy first walked over and picked up a stick from the ground. "Do you know how to play the throwing game?" he asked. Mercy shook her head. She had played very few games in her short life. Surviving had taken up most of her time and energy. "I will teach you," the boy said. "But first, you need a name that fits. Mercy sounds like something white people call their horses. What should we call her?" he asked the group. The children looked at Mercy with new interest, studying her face as if trying to read a story written there. Finally, the girl with the ground-length braids spoke up. "Her eyes are like the color of deep water where it meets the sky," she said thoughtfully. "And she was brave enough to tell us the truth about being thrown away. Truth takes courage. Maybe we should call her something that means brave water or honest river." The children debated various names, mixing English and Lakota words together, as they tried different combinations. Mercy listened to them argue over what to call her, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was watching people fight for her instead of against her. As the sun climbed higher and the naming debate continued, Mercy realized something important was happening. These children weren't just giving her a nickname, they were deciding whether to accept her into their group, whether to make her one of them instead of keeping her as an outsider. The decision they reached would determine whether her next months in the village would be filled with friendship or loneliness. And as their voices rose and fell like music around her, Mercy found herself hoping harder than she had ever hoped for anything in her young life. 2 months later, the first snow began falling, like tiny white feathers from a sky that looked angry enough to bite. Mercy, Running Creek, the name the children had finally chosen for her, stood outside the lodge she now called home, catching snowflakes on her tongue and laughing at how they made her mouth tingle with cold. The village had transformed over the weeks since her arrival. What had once seemed like a maze of strange lodges and confusing customs now felt familiar as her own heartbeat. She knew which dogs were friendly and which ones to avoid. She could tell time by watching the shadows move across the camp circle. She even understood most conversations, though speaking Lakota still made her tongue feel clumsy as a newborn calf trying to walk. "Mercy," Tahunke Waste called from beside the creek, where she knelt with several other girls, breaking ice to get water for their families. Come help us before the water freezes too thick to break." Running toward her cousin, Mercy slipped on a patch of frozen ground and tumbled forward, landing in a heap of arms and legs that made the other girls burst into giggles. Instead of feeling embarrassed, Mercy found herself laughing too. Falling down used to mean getting hurt and having no one care. Now it meant having friends who would help her up and laugh with her, instead of at her. "You run like a buffalo with ice on its hooves," teased Little Fox, the boy who had challenged her that first day and had since become one of her closest friends. "Maybe we should call you Sliding Elk instead." "Buffalo are stronger than elk," Mercy shot back, brushing snow from her dress. "I would rather run like something strong than something that just looks pretty." The comment surprised everyone, including herself. Back when she lived with white people, girls were supposed to want to be pretty above all else. But here, among the Oglala, strength seemed to matter more than looks. The change in thinking felt strange but wonderful, like putting on clothes that actually fit, instead of wearing things too big or too small. As they worked together to fill water containers, their hands growing numb from the cold despite their mittens, Mercy noticed something troubling. Several of the other children kept glancing toward the edge of camp, where armed warriors stood watch more carefully than usual. When she asked Wichasha Waste about it, her cousin's face grew serious. "There have been strangers asking questions at the trading posts," Wichasha Waste explained quietly. "White men looking for a missing girl who matches your appearance. Father thinks they might come here." The words hit Mercy like a punch to the stomach. She had been so happy learning to belong somewhere that she had almost forgotten the world outside the village might still want to claim her. The thought of strangers coming to take her away made her hands shake worse than the cold ever could. "What if they try to make me go with them?" she whispered. "Then we will hide you," Little Fox said fiercely. "You are Oglala now. We protect our own." His certainty warmed Mercy's heart, but it also scared her. She didn't want her new family to get in trouble because of her. White soldiers had guns and laws that always seemed to favor other white people, even when those people were wrong. That afternoon, while the women worked on winter preparations and the men held council meetings, the children played a new game Mercy had never seen before. They called it Defend the Village, and it involved some children pretending to be enemies while others protected their camp. "You be the chief's daughter," Little Fox told Mercy as they chose sides. "That means everyone has to work extra hard to keep you safe." Being chosen as someone worth protecting felt better than any present Mercy had ever received. But as the game progressed, she began to notice how the enemies in their play all looked and acted like white soldiers. The children were practicing for something they hoped would never happen, but that they feared might come anyway. The game ended when real shouts echoed from the edge of camp. The children froze, their pretend battle suddenly feeling too much like reality. Adult voices carried on the wind, some speaking English in harsh tones that made Mercy's skin crawl with memories of the trading post. "Stay here," Wichasha Waste commanded. But Mercy was already moving toward the sounds. She had learned that hiding from problems didn't make them go away. If people were coming for her, she wanted to see them first. Creeping between lodges, she got close enough to see 3 white men on horseback, talking to Chief Short Bull and several tribal elders. The men wore clothes that marked them as traders or government officials, and their faces carried the kind of anger that came from being told no when they expected to hear yes. "We know she's here," one of the men was saying, his voice loud enough to carry across the camp. "White girl, about 4 years old, mixed blood. Someone saw an Indian take her from Morrison's place back in the fall." Mercy's blood turned colder than the snow around her feet. These men weren't just asking questions anymore. They had come to take her back to a world that had already decided she didn't belong in it. Chief Shortbull's response came in English, but his tone needed no translation. "Many children live in this village. None of them belong to white traders." "Don't lie to us, old man," the second trader snarled. "We have legal papers. That child belongs in civilization, not running wild with savages." The insult cracked across the camp like a whip. Mercy saw warriors' hands move toward their weapons, saw women pull their own children closer to their sides. The word savages hung in the air like poison smoke, making everything feel dangerous. But then something unexpected happened. From behind her, Mercy heard the voices of her friends. Little Fox, Wichasha Waste, and a dozen other children had followed her despite being told to stay back. Now they stood around her in a protective circle, their young faces fierce as wolves defending their pack. "We won't let them take you," Little Fox whispered. "You are our sister now." Looking at these children who had chosen to stand with her, Mercy felt something new growing in her chest. Not fear this time, but determination. She had spent her whole life being something that happened to other people. Maybe it was time to become someone who made things happen instead. The confrontation at the edge of camp continued, voices growing louder and more threatening. But surrounded by friends who considered her family, Mercy began to form a plan that would surprise everyone, including herself. The first snowflake landed on Mercy's nose, like a cold kiss from the sky spirits. She giggled and tried to catch more with her tongue, while Wichasha Waste showed her how to weave grass into tiny dolls. But Wichasha Waste watched the northern horizon with worried eyes. The clouds gathering there looked angry and full of teeth. "Ina," Mercy called to Wichasha Waste, using the Lakota word for mother that now felt natural on her lips. "Look how the snow dances." But Wichasha Waste was already packing dried meat into leather bags, her movements quick and sure. The other women moved with the same urgency, calling children inside lodges and checking that winter supplies were ready. Elder Tatanka Pitekala walked from lodge to lodge, his old bones telling him stories about the storm that most people couldn't read yet. "This one will be bad," he told Wichasha Waste, pointing at the wall of gray clouds marching toward them like enemy warriors. "The spirits are angry about something. I can feel it in my teeth." By evening, the wind began to howl like hungry wolves. Snow fell so thick that Mercy couldn't see the lodge next to theirs. The buffalo hide walls shook and rattled as if giant hands were trying to tear them apart. Inside, the family huddled around the central fire, telling stories to keep their minds off the storm's fury. Mercy snuggled between her adopted father and sister, listening to tales of Iktomi the spider trickster and brave warriors who fought ice giants. The fire cast dancing shadows on the lodge walls, making the painted horses and buffalo seem alive. She felt safe and warm, surrounded by people who loved her. But on the second day, the cold found ways to creep inside. It slithered under the lodge door and wrapped around their ankles like invisible snakes. The fire ate through their wood supply faster than anyone expected. Mercy's breath came out in little white puffs, and her fingers turned red despite the thick mittens Wichasha Waste had made for her. "The animals know to prepare better than we do sometimes," Wichasha Waste said, watching Mercy shiver. He pulled her closer, sharing his body heat. "Bears sleep through the worst of it. Maybe we should learn from them." On the third morning, Mercy woke up coughing. At first, it was just little coughs that tickled her throat. But as the day went on, the coughs got deeper and harder, coming from somewhere deep in her chest. Her head felt hot, and the lodge seemed to spin when she tried to sit up. "Something's wrong with the little one," Wichasha Waste said, pressing her palm against Mercy's forehead. The child's skin burned like summer rocks, but she shivered as if she were made of ice. Tessenwin, the medicine woman, came through the storm, wrapped in heavy furs. Her weathered face looked serious as she examined Mercy, listening to her breathing and checking her eyes. The old woman's healing bag held roots and herbs that had cured many sicknesses, but this was different. "Her body is fighting something it doesn't know how to beat," Tessenwin said quietly to Wichasha Waste. "Children from the warm places sometimes struggle with our winters. Their blood isn't used to this kind of cold." The fever climbed higher as night fell. Mercy's small body shook with chills, even though her skin felt like it was on fire. She mumbled words that didn't make sense, sometimes in English, sometimes in the little bit of Lakota she had learned. Her breathing became shallow and fast, like a frightened rabbit. Wichasha Waste held her against his chest, feeling helpless for the first time since he had found her in that burlap sack. Around him, his family took turns keeping watch, bringing cool water to dab on her forehead and warm broths to help her swallow. Tashunke Waste sat beside them, holding her cousin's hand and whispering prayers she had learned from the elders. "Please don't take her back to the spirit world," Winyan Wastewind prayed aloud. "She just found her family. She needs more time to grow and learn and be happy." As the storm raged outside, Mercy's fever reached its peak. Her lips moved constantly, forming words in a strange mixture of both languages. She called for her birth mother in English, then reached for Winyan Wastewind, calling her Ina in Lakota. She spoke of green fields and buffalo hunts, of lullabies and war songs, as if her mind was trying to weave together all the pieces of who she was becoming. "She's walking between two worlds," Pessinwin observed, adding more herbs to the tea she was brewing. "Sometimes children do this when they're very sick. They visit the spirit world, but haven't decided if they want to stay or come back." The whole lodge held its breath as Mercy's fever began to break near dawn. Her breathing became deeper and more regular. The wild shaking stopped, and color started to return to her pale cheeks. She opened her eyes and looked around at all the worried faces watching her. "8," she whispered to Wichasha Waste, using the Lakota word for father. Her voice was weak but clear. "Did I sleep long?" Relief washed over everyone, like warm sunshine after a cold night. Winyan Wastewind laughed and cried at the same time, pulling Mercy into a gentle hug. Tashunke Waste clapped her hands with joy, and even serious old Pessanwin smiled. Outside, the storm was finally ending. Weak sunlight filtered through the clouds, and the howling wind died down to gentle whispers. The worst was over, but something had changed during those 3 terrible days. Mercy had fought her hardest battle yet, and won, proving that she belonged here not just in her heart, but in her very bones. But as spring approached, bringing melting snow and returning buffalo, it would also bring visitors who would test the family's bonds in ways they never expected. Jeremiah Morrison's wagon wheels cut deep ruts in the muddy spring earth as he led his trading party toward the Oglala village. The man's hard eyes scanned the horizon like a hawk looking for prey, and his weathered hands gripped the reins with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. "There it is," he told his 3 companions, pointing at the smoke rising from the lodges nestled in the valley below. "Bunch of heathens living like animals, but they've got furs worth good money, and something else I need to collect." His men nodded, checking their weapons and straightening their backs. They had dealt with Indians before, always from a position of strength. The papers in Morrison's coat pocket gave him legal right to what he came for, or so he believed. In the village, children spotted the approaching wagons first and ran to spread the news. Mercy was helping Winyan Wastewind scrape a buffalo hide when she heard the excited voices calling out that white traders were coming. "Should we hide?" Tashunke Waste asked, remembering stories the elders told about bad men who sometimes came with the traders. "No, daughter," Winyan Wastewind said firmly. "We have nothing to be ashamed of, but stay close to me." Wichasha Waste emerged from his lodge as the wagons rolled to a stop near the council area. He had traded with white men before, but something about this Morrison felt different. The man's eyes held coldness that had nothing to do with making fair deals. Elder Tatanka Pitakala walked forward to greet the visitors, as was proper. His aged but dignified presence commanded respect from both his own people and most outsiders, who understood the wisdom that came with 70 winters of life. "Welcome to our village," the elder said in careful English. "What brings you to trade with the Oglala?" Morrison climbed down from his wagon, his boots squelching in the spring mud. He looked around the village with barely hidden disgust, as if the sight of people living differently than him offended his very soul. "We've got good trade goods," he said loudly, gesturing at his loaded wagons. "Blankets, metal tools, sugar, coffee. But I'm also here about something that was stolen from us last fall." The word "stolen" hit the gathered villagers like a slap across the face. Murmurs of anger rippled through the crowd. The Oglala were many things, but thieves they were not. "No one here steals," Tatanka Pitekala replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Speak plainly about what you think we have taken." Morrison's cold smile made Mercy shiver, where she stood beside Wichasha Waste. Something about the way his eyes moved over the crowd made her want to hide behind her adopted mother's dress. "A child," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the village like the crack of a whip. "White child, about 4 or 5 years old now. Blue-green eyes, light hair. Belongs to civilized people, not savages playing house." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a bad fire. Several young warriors stepped forward, their hands moving toward their weapons. But Tatanka Pitekala raised his hand for patience. Mercy felt her heart begin to pound like a war drum. She pressed closer to Wichasha Waste, who placed a protective arm around her shoulders. This man was talking about her, she realized with growing fear. "You speak of the child we found dying in a sack?" Wichasha Waste asked, stepping into view. "The one thrown away like garbage beside your trading post?" Morrison's eyes locked onto Mercy, and his smile grew wider and colder. "There she is. Mercy Thornton, daughter of Patrick Thornton and his Irish wife. Both dead now. God rest their souls. But they left debts. That child is payment for what they owed." "Payment?" Wichasha Waste's voice rose with outrage. "Children are not payment for anything. White children belong with white people," Morrison declared, pulling folded papers from his coat. "I got legal guardianship here, all proper and signed by a real judge. She's coming with us today." Mercy started to shake, not from cold but from pure terror. The memory of being abandoned once before came flooding back, along with the desperate loneliness and fear she had felt in that burlap sack. These men wanted to take her away from the only family she had ever really known. "I won't go," she said, her small voice somehow carrying clearly in the tense silence. "This is my home. These are my people." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Little girl, you don't get to choose. You're coming with us whether you like it or not. We'll teach you proper Christian ways and get that savage nonsense out of your head." That's when Wichasha Waste stepped directly between Morrison and Mercy, his presence suddenly filling the space like a mountain that had grown out of the earth. "This child chose her family," he said quietly, but his words carried the kind of power that made smart men pay attention. "She speaks our language. She knows our ways. She calls my sister mother and me father. By what right do strangers claim her now?" Morrison's hand moved toward the pistol on his hip, but he quickly saw that he was surrounded by warriors who had appeared like shadows from between the lodges. His 3 companions suddenly looked a lot less confident about their chances. "By right of law and civilization," Morrison blustered, but his voice had lost some of its earlier strength. "That child needs proper schooling and Christian teaching, not this heathen nonsense. She needs love and family," Wichasha Waste said fiercely, pulling Mercy closer. "Things you threw away when you left her to die." The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring ready to snap. Everyone waited to see who would make the first move, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything for the small girl caught in the middle of 2 very different worlds. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when hoofbeats thundered across the prairie like rolling thunder. Mercy dropped her willow basket and grabbed her cousin's hand as 4 riders charged toward their village, dust clouds rising behind them like angry spirits. "Run to the lodges," whispered Tashunke Waste, but both girls stood frozen as the strangers dismounted near the council fire. These weren't the friendly traders who brought sugar and metal tools. These men carried themselves like wolves circling a wounded deer. Morrison stepped forward first, his boots crunching on dried grass as morning dew still clung to the earth. Behind him stood 3 others men, with hard faces and guns hanging heavy on their hips. The biggest one spat tobacco juice that stained the sacred ground near where the elders gathered each dawn to pray. "We've come for the white girl," Morrison announced, his voice cutting through the peaceful morning like an axe through wood. "Got papers here saying she belongs with Christian folk, not heathens." From her hiding spot behind the women's lodge, Mercy felt her heart beating so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She understood enough English now to know they meant her. These strangers wanted to take her away from the only real family she'd ever known. Wichasha Waste emerged from his lodge, moving with the quiet strength of a mountain cat. His sister followed, and then other warriors appeared from different directions. It seemed like they had been expecting this day, preparing for it, like hunters preparing for a difficult winter. "This child was dying when I found her," Wichasha Waste said in clear English, each word falling like stones into still water. "Your people threw her away like broken pottery. We gave her life." Morrison pulled out folded papers from his jacket pocket, waving them in the air like they were medicine bundles with special power. "Don't matter what you think you did. Law says she's white, and white children belong with white families. We're taking her to folks in Nebraska Territory, who'll raise her proper." The interpreter, a nervous man with twitching hands, translated the words into Lakota for the elders who didn't speak English. Their faces grew dark as storm clouds when they understood what the papers meant. Elder Short Bull stepped forward, his walking stick tapping against the earth with each careful step. Though his back was bent with 70 winters, his voice still carried the authority of someone who had led war parties against enemy tribes and negotiated with government officials. "These papers," Short Bull said through the interpreter, "what do they know about this child's heart? What do they know about the tears she cried when fever almost took her? What do they know about the laughter she shares with her cousins?" But Morrison wasn't interested in hearts or laughter. He gestured to his men, and they began moving toward where the children watched from beside the creek. Their intentions were clear as muddy water. They planned to take Mercy, whether the tribe agreed or not. "That's far enough," said a voice that cut through the tension like lightning splitting a tree. 12 Oglala warriors stepped out from behind the lodges, their presence transforming the morning from peaceful to dangerous in the span of a heartbeat. They weren't painted for war, but their faces showed the same determination that had helped them survive on these plains for countless generations. Red Hawk, the war chief, held his lance with the casual ease of someone who had counted coup against Crow raiders and lived to tell the story. Beside him stood men who had hunted buffalo in blizzards and tracked enemies across rivers swollen with spring rain. 12 against 4, Morrison muttered to his companions, his confidence shrinking like a hide left too long in the sun. But Mercy surprised everyone by stepping out from her hiding place, her small feet making no sound on the grass. As she walked toward the group of arguing adults, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. But something deeper than fear pushed her forward. "I don't want to go," she said in English, her young voice carrying across the village like the call of a meadowlark at dawn. Then she repeated the same words in Lakota, so her family would understand. The child's declaration hung in the morning air like smoke from the sacred fire. Here was someone barely 9 winters old, standing between two worlds and choosing the one that had chosen her first. Morrison's face turned red as sunset, and his hand moved toward the gun at his side. "Girl don't know what's best for her. We're taking her anyway, and any Indian tries to stop us will answer to the territorial government." The threat crackled between the two groups like electricity before a storm. Women gathered their smaller children and moved them toward the safety of the lodges. Men checked their weapons without seeming to move at all. Then Wichasha Waste did something unexpected. Instead of reaching for his knife or calling for his warriors to attack, he placed one gentle hand on Mercy's shoulder and spoke directly to Morrison, in words everyone could understand. "You want to take a child who chose her family. You want to drag her away from people who love her to strangers who see her as a burden. What kind of Christians does this make you?" The question hit Morrison like a slap across the face. Around him, his own men began shifting uncomfortably, perhaps remembering their own children safe at home, perhaps wondering if they were on the right side of this fight. "She's white," Morrison repeated, but his voice had lost some of its earlier force. She belongs with her own kind. Her own kind? Wastewind stepped forward, her voice sharp as winter wind. Her own kind abandoned her to die. We are her kind now. The standoff stretched longer than a winter night, neither side willing to back down, both sides knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. In the growing silence, a meadowlark sang from somewhere near the creek, its song, sweet and wild and free. 10 summers had passed, like seasons of plenty and seasons of want, each one adding new stories to the growing legend of Mercy Running Horse. The girl who once fit inside a grain sack now stood tall as prairie grass, her 19th winter approaching with the steady certainty of migrating geese. She knelt beside Willow Creek on this warm morning in 1869, her skilled fingers weaving stories into a marriage blanket that would soon cover her wedding lodge. Her reflection in the water showed a face that had grown into its mixed heritage like a tree growing toward sunlight. The blue-green eyes still marked her as different, but now they sparkled with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. "Still can't believe my little sister's getting married," laughed Wichasha Waste, now a woman of 25 winters, with 3 children playing nearby. She sat beside Mercy, her own hands busy with beadwork that would decorate her cousin's wedding dress. The morning air carried the sounds of a village preparing for celebration. Children ran between lodges, practicing the songs they would sing, while grandmothers argued good-naturedly about which recipes would best honor the occasion. It was the kind of day that made everything seem possible. "Remember when you first taught me to weave grass baskets?" Mercy asked, holding up a section of the blanket where geometric patterns told the story of her journey from abandonment to belonging. "My fingers were so clumsy I kept dropping everything. Remember when you got so sick that first winter we thought the spirits were calling you home?" Wichasha Waste replied, her voice growing soft with memory. "Father sat up with you for 4 nights, singing healing songs, until his voice gave out." From across the village came the sound of horses arriving, not the threatening thunder of unwelcome visitors, but the measured pace of expected guests. Mercy looked up to see a small group of Lakota riders approaching, led by a young man whose presence made her heart beat faster than hummingbird wings. Mato Najin Standing Bear had traveled 3 days from his family's winter camp to join the celebration. At 22 winters, he carried himself with the quiet strength that came from successful hunts and respected counsel among his people. More importantly to Mercy, he looked at her like she was exactly who she was meant to be. "Your future husband has good timing," Wichasha Waste teased, watching as Standing Bear dismounted near the horse herd. "The sun always seems brighter when he's around." As if hearing their conversation from across the village, Standing Bear turned and caught sight of Mercy beside the creek. His serious expression melted into the kind of smile that had first made her notice him during the Sundance ceremony 2 summers ago. But their moment of connection was interrupted by another group of arriving guests, these traveling on foot from the direction of the government fort, their approach marked by the uncomfortable silence that always surrounded official visits. Agent Crawford, the new Bureau of Indian Affairs representative, walked with the measured steps of someone who believed his authority came from pieces of paper rather than earned respect. Behind him came 2 assistants and a woman in severe black dress, who carried herself like a storm cloud, looking for somewhere to rain. "Miss Thornton," Agent Crawford called out, using the name that hadn't belonged to Mercy for more than a decade. "I need to speak with you about your legal status." The words fell across the village celebration like ash from a distant fire, turning the morning's joy into something harder and more complicated. Mercy rose from beside the creek, her wedding blanket forgotten as old fears stirred in her chest. Wichasha Waste appeared at her side as if summoned by her need, his presence steady as stone despite the silver now threading through his dark hair. Behind him came other members of their extended family, forming a protective circle that had been tested before and proven strong. "My daughter has no business with the government," Wichasha Waste said in English, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had negotiated with officials before and survived the experience. Agent Crawford shuffled his papers like they were medicine cards that could change reality. According to territorial records, this woman was born to Irish and Cherokee parents, making her a ward of the state until she reaches legal majority. She cannot enter into marriage contracts under Indian law without proper documentation. The woman in black stepped forward, her pinched face showing the kind of disapproval usually reserved for spoiled meat. I am Miss Hartwell, from the Territorial Women's Christian Society. We've prepared a place for this young woman at our school in Cheyenne, where she can learn proper domestic skills and Christian values before considering marriage. Standing Bear moved closer, his hand resting on his knife handle in a gesture that spoke louder than threats. Around the village, other warriors began positioning themselves strategically, their movements subtle but unmistakable. She is Oglala, Standing Bear said in careful English, each word chosen with the precision of an arrow aimed at its target. She has been Oglala for 10 winters. Your papers mean nothing here. Miss Hartwell sniffed disapprovingly, her gaze taking in Mercy's traditional dress and beaded hair ornaments with obvious distaste. Look at her, dressed like a savage, planning to marry according to heathen customs. Is this what you want for a white woman's future? The insult hung in the air like smoke from green wood, bitter and choking. But before anyone else could respond, Mercy herself stepped forward, her voice carrying the strength that came from knowing exactly who she was. I am not a white woman, she said clearly, looking directly at Miss Hartwell without flinching. I am not a Cherokee woman. I am not an Irish woman. I am Mercy Running Horse, daughter of Wichasha Waste, sister to this village, and soon-to-be wife to Standing Bear. Your papers cannot change what lives in my heart. The declaration rippled through the gathered crowd like wind across water. Even Agent Crawford seemed taken aback by the quiet certainty in her voice, the complete absence of doubt or confusion about her identity. Elder Shortbull, now bent almost double with age but still sharp as winter wind, approached the group with careful steps. His walking stick tapped against the earth as he positioned himself directly in front of the government representatives. This woman, he said through the interpreter, his voice carrying the weight of 8 decades of survival, was thrown away by your people like refuse. We found her. We raised her. We made her one of us. Now you want to claim her because she has grown beautiful and strong? The old man's words cut deeper than any weapon, exposing the hypocrisy that everyone could see but no one had dared to name. The same society that had abandoned a mixed-blood child now wanted to reclaim the strong woman she had become. Agent Crawford shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing the truth in the elder's words. Miss Hartwell, however, remained unmoved, her rigid certainty unshaken by moral arguments. The law is the law, she declared. This woman belongs with Christian people, not heathens. But before the argument could escalate further, something unexpected happened. A new voice joined the conversation, one that surprised everyone, including Mercy herself. The lady makes a fair point about the law, came a familiar voice from behind the government group. Morrison stepped into view, older now and wearing better clothes, but still recognizable as the traitor who had tried to take Mercy away 10 years earlier. His appearance sent whispers through the crowd, like wind through dry grass. Morrison, Wichasha Waste said, his hand moving instinctively toward his knife. You were told never to return here. But Morrison held up his hands in a gesture of peace, his expression lacking the hostility he had carried during their previous encounter. Came here to set things right, he said simply. Been carrying guilt about that child for too many years. He pulled out a leather pouch from his jacket and withdrew several official-looking documents. These here are the original papers about the Thornton child. Turns out her Cherokee father had legal rights that nobody bothered to check back then. According to territorial law, she could choose her own guardians when her parents died. The revelation hit the gathering like lightning striking clear sky. Even Agent Crawford, leaned forward to examine the papers Morrison offered. "What you're saying," Crawford said slowly, "is that her adoption by this Indian family was legal under territorial statutes?" Morrison nodded, his weathered face showing something that might have been relief. "More than legal. It was her right. Should have said something years ago, but I was too concerned with my own interests to care about one mixed-blood child." Miss Hartwell snatched the papers from Crawford's hands, her face growing redder as she read. "This cannot be right," she muttered. "There must be some mistake." But Elder Shortbull was already smiling. His ancient face creased with satisfaction. "The spirits have long memories," he said through the interpreter. "Truth has a way of surfacing like winter bones after spring rain." Standing Bear moved to Mercy's side, taking her hand in his with the gentle certainty of someone who had never doubted this moment would come. "Are we free to marry according to our customs?" he asked Crawford directly. The agent studied the papers again, his official authority suddenly seeming less important than the human story unfolding before him. "According to these documents, Miss Running Horse, you have been a legal member of this tribe since childhood. Your marriage is your own choice to make." The celebration that erupted shook the earth like buffalo running. Children whooped and danced while adults embraced and offered prayers of thanksgiving. Even some of Crawford's assistants smiled, caught up in the joy despite their official positions. As the sun reached its highest point, Mercy found herself standing exactly where her story had begun, beside the trading post where she had once been abandoned. But now, she stood as a woman choosing her future rather than a child abandoned to die. "Thank you," she said to Morrison, the words carrying weight beyond their simple sound. The old trader nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Should have done right by you years ago. Least I can do now is witness your happiness." As the village prepared for the evening's wedding ceremony, Mercy Running Horse looked across the plains that had once seemed so vast and empty. Now they felt like home not because they were familiar, but because they were filled with people who had chosen to love her exactly as she was. The earth beneath her feet seemed to breathe with ancient rhythms, and in that breathing, she heard the voice of every child who had ever been thrown away and found again, every person who had ever discovered that belonging was not about blood, but about choice. Her story had become their story. And their story had become the endless, breathing truth of what it meant to be human in a world large enough for every kind of love.